Hi, everyone. So my name is Samantha. I'm a freelance narrative designer, and today I'm going to be talking about the things that I've learned in my first 6 months of professional writing. So I'm going to take you through kind of 10 lessons that I wish someone had sat down and told me before I was going to start writing. So the talk today is kind of aimed, when I was writing it, aims mainly at people who are either working in or looking for their first AAA writing experience, but hopefully there'll be a lot in here that's useful for indie and AA writers as well. So first of all, so a bit about me and my background and my journey into writing. So back before I was even in the games industry, I was a business consultant. I was working in London and writing for books and games in my spare time. And I decided to get a master's in game design from Brunel University in 2017. So when I finished that, I started working at Riot Games in their UK office. I was a development manager there, so most of the stuff I was doing was the same kind of stuff I'd been doing as a business consultant, just within the games industry. So being in the industry then opened up quite a few new networks, so I was able to meet and even be mentored by some professional writers. So when I finished up with Riot Games earlier this year, I decided that I wanted to move into narrative design full-time. So I began applying for jobs, going through writing tests and interviews and all the other fun stuff that you have to do to get your first contract. So I managed to get a freelance script writing contract with Ubisoft back in March this year. I've also taken on a freelance writing role with Drop Bear Bytes, who are producing a recently announced RPG called Broken Roads, which is set in a post-apocalyptic Australia, so that should be quite good fun. I'm also the writer for Yokai Moon. So this is a passion project made by myself and two friends who are also in the games industry. This is a turn-based survival game, and we're hoping to release soon, probably in the next few months, early next year maybe. So I've been really busy, and I've learned quite a lot in my first 6 months of professional writing. I've drawn inspiration and learnings from all of these roles and looked back on what I've learned to create the few lessons that I wish I'd known before I'd started, and hopefully it will help some of you as well. So just as a quick disclaimer before I begin, obviously writing is such a creative job. There's a lot of different variety within the roles. So no two AAA studios are the same, just as no two indie studios are the same. And even within a big company, different departments, different offices, and different studios can be different as well. Also, as a freelance writer, my experience will vary, obviously from not only other freelance writers, but also in-house writers as well. So all I can hope really is to give you insight into what I've learned, what I wish I'd known from the start, and then for you to use that knowledge in whatever way works best for you. So I'll kick off with lesson number 1, which is a really important one. So lesson number 1 is about fun work still being work. And this is kind of all around self-care and avoiding burnout. So writing is challenging, but it should be an enjoyable challenge if it's something you want to do as a career. However, when you do a job you love, it can be a really easy thing to feel guilty about having those occasional bad days that everybody does. Even if you enjoy it, work is still work, and it should be treated as such. So it's fine and it's normal to have bad days, to occasionally feel frustrated, maybe even daydream about doing something completely different once in a while. I found that accepting those thoughts when you have them, and don't be too hard on yourself, because we all do. I found that this skill early on also really affected my support networks. So I found if I'd had a tough day and I needed to vent, or maybe I wanted to chat about a decision that I'd made at work or a mistake I'd made, I kind of struggled talking to close friends and family about it, because I didn't want to appear ungrateful, moaning about a job that I really enjoyed doing, and knew that I was lucky to be doing. So obviously there are different ways about this that different people can use to deal with. So I found that eventually I opened up to my partner and one of my best friends who also works in the games industry. And by acknowledging that I wasn't I wasn't moaning for the sake of moaning, that I was happy in the job, I loved the work I was doing, I just occasionally needed to open up to them about tough days, when I felt frustrated or needed to vent about something. I'm going to put it here because it's worth mentioning, but obviously do be aware of any NDAs or contracts you have if you do talk to other people about the work you're doing, just to be safe. So I found that having a couple of trusted friends to have a coffee with, to complain about stuff occasionally, and get good advice if needed, really helped me immensely. It's something that I wish I'd done much earlier, rather than just carrying on trying to cope alone at the start. Lesson number 2. Don't be taken advantage of. So writing is a highly skilled job. And writing for games involves not only understanding the skill of actually writing, but also being an expert collaborator, being a competent project manager, being able to use scripting engines, and also having a working understanding of game design and development. So writing for games is a wonderful privilege, as well as a job, remember lesson number 1. But it's also really, really hard. No matter where you work, there'll be lots of different processes and different ways of working, different writers' rules and editing or rewriting rules. There will always be a new technical aspect to practice, things to improve on and get better at, but there also won't always be time. Deadlines mean that you will need to learn and get better really quick. That doesn't mean it's not fun, and a certain amount of challenge is truly needed to reach your flow states and be satisfied with your work. Sorry, I've gone off topic. I have gone very off topic. I'm going to start again. Lesson number 2. Sorry, I went ahead of myself. So lesson number 2 is about not being taken advantage of. So this is the cheat lesson, which is probably why I skipped it and went to number 3 instead, because this is something that I learned before I actually started writing professionally. And it's also something I've heard about from friends in different creative fields in the industry. I think it's a really important point to address, so I'm sneaking it in here, basically. So lots of people want to be writers, and there aren't many writing jobs around. Lots of writers come from the games industry from different backgrounds, and lots of people will use contacts in those companies to try and get some experience, so maybe taking on some writing work in the evening, or working for a writing team alongside the day job. This is obviously a really grey area, and everyone will have differing viewpoints. But all I really want to say is to watch out for people or companies taking advantage of you. Writing without pay or without credit, without acknowledgement, it might well give you relevant experience, but it can also lead you down a dark path towards burnout, towards free labour, and to the for exposure territory that sadly we all know so well. Sometimes it might well be a valuable thing to do for the sake of your future career, but make sure it's an informed decision you're making and not just the company taking advantage of you, your time and your ambition. On an adjacent note to this, the same lesson can be applied to rates, especially if you're a freelancer or you're new to writing. Just because it's a job you really want to do and you enjoy doing doesn't mean it isn't worth being paid properly for. If you're in any doubt about how much you should be charging, I recommend checking out the Writers Guild of Great Britain and their free resource here, Writing for Video Games. It's available from their website and includes rate guidance as well as information on contracts and other important stuff. So I'm now going to move on to the lesson I started telling you about. There we go. Lesson number 3. So, accept that it's a challenging job and be ready to learn. I'm just going to go through all again, so bear with me. So writing is a highly skilled job. Writing for games involves not only understanding the skill of writing, but also being an expert collaborator, being a competent project manager, being able to use scripting engines, and also having a working understanding of game design and development. Writing for games is a wonderful privilege, but it's also really, really hard. No matter where you work, there will be lots of different processes and different ways of working. So different writers' rooms or editing and rewriting rules to learn. There will always be a new technical aspect to practice, things to improve on and get better at, but there won't always be time. So deadlines mean that you will have to learn and get better quickly. That doesn't mean it's not fun, and a certain amount of challenge is needed to truly reach flow states and to feel satisfied with your work. But it's important to recognise the challenge involved and to be proactive about it where you can. So if, for example, you know that you struggle with writing complex characters, then do what you can to improve. Read some articles or some books, practice where you can, maybe find a senior writer who's really good at it and see if you can have a coffee and a chat with them. And remember to play and watch games and films that have rich characters and study how they do it as well. This is really how I was able to go from dreaming about being a writer to becoming one, even before my first contract. I got friends, family, and even helpful internet strangers to read through things I'd written, to give me notes and thoughts, and then examined them and worked out what I needed to do to improve. As one of my friends puts it, this is really what takes you from doing something as a hobby to doing something as a job in any creative discipline. And it also leads you nicely to lesson number 4, which is all around receiving feedback. Hopefully you'll never receive feedback quite this bad from so many people outside of playing Fallout. So lots of people think that writing is something that can be learned passively from reading a book or watching a film, and just a little bit from writing itself. But only by inspecting how it's done, by gathering feedback on your own work and writing with intent, will you start to see real improvements. Take advantage of any other writers you may be working with or networking with. Get advice, get feedback on your writing, and make sure you're still playing other games and learning from their narratives as well. Which can be harder than it sounds, because when you're writing for games as a full-time job, sometimes you don't want to be studying more games in your precious free time. Receiving feedback is something that I definitely got better at while doing my master's in game design. So one module of the course involved making a game prototype every single week, and then having someone else in the course play it and give feedback on it in front of the whole class. It was terrifying at first, but then when I got used to it, then the most valuable part of the course. And this is actually a slide from one of the very first games that I made. And you can probably see why I decided to stick to narrative rather than be an artist. So it's also good to learn to recognise what type of feedback you're getting. Is it something technical? Is it something you can learn to make all of your writing better? Or is it something specific to that particular studio, that game, or that genre that's useful to know for now and to bear in mind for future work? Is it maybe a personal opinion or a style preference? Or is it feedback that relates to gameplay expectations or limitations? Paying attention to these kind of things can really help you understand how to use your feedback once you receive it. And lesson number 5 is the flip side of this, which is giving feedback. This is how not to do it. So, you'll also be expected to get good at giving feedback. It doesn't matter if you're the most junior writer in the room, a good studio or team will be looking to get a range of feedback on a script or an idea. So giving feedback can be a really tricky thing to do well. And it will make you a better team player and a collaborator to practice this and exercise your own feedback muscle. It can also help you to improve your own writing by learning to critique other writing, as well as help you understand feedback when it's given to you. You'll probably find yourself doing this a lot, so it's a good idea to learn how to give good constructive feedback as early as you can. One thing you can consider when giving feedback is the use of I language. So if you deliver feedback using I language, so words like I think and I feel, instead of you language, it's easier for the receiver to hear it in a non-defensive way and actually take in the feedback in the way it's intended. There's also some really interesting neuroscience around this, and one researcher found that holding something warm when you're talking to someone will make you have literally warmer feelings towards them, which is why Sid say with his tea break. So this is actually how we used to do regular one-to-ones in Riot games. We'd go out, we'd have a coffee, we'd have a tea, and then we'd discuss feedback and give each other feedback. And it's amazing how much more receptive and relaxed those sessions can be, especially around difficult feedback, just by introducing a cup of tea and an informal session. Lesson number 6, be a team player. So the other thing about a big studio and a large game production team, sorry, I've lost myself again. Found it. So this is all around learning to collaborate and being a team player. So one of the things I found overwhelming this year when I started writing professionally was the number of people it would involve. People that would be reading my work, sometimes to my horror, before it was even ready. This is a really good thing to be prepared for and to get used to fast. Especially in bigger studios, there will be dozens of people with an interest in your narrative. They'll want to be reading, reviewing, editing, redirecting, suggesting ideas, asking lots of questions, having opinions, and often be asking, but how does this fit with gameplay? This is what makes games writing great. Instead of just one person, the writer, making the decisions and directing the story, in games we have a raft of highly talented, passionate game makers being involved in building a collaborative product. So this does also mean that you'll be receiving lots of feedback, sometimes even contradictory feedback, and can lead to constant change and revision. It also means understanding how to work well in a team, how to collaborate, and how to manage your own workload and deadlines with respect to others. The myth of the isolated writer locked away in their study wrestling with a draft is not representative of games writing. Games writing is all about being a team player. The good news is this is where any previous working, studying, or volunteer experience will come in useful. Any role that you've done that involves working in a team or in some kind of production pipeline will help you adjust to the process and set up in whatever studio you're writing in. And if you're in a position where maybe you're still at university or looking for your first job, any experience you can get now will help you, not only when you get in the job, but maybe to get that first contract in the first place. So more than once I was told that part of the reason I was offered the contract with Ubisoft was because I had clearly demonstrated I knew how the game production pipeline worked, and also how to get stuff done in a team. So lesson number 7, we touched on it a moment ago, but this is all around managing your time and your deadlines. The other thing about a big studio and a large game production team is that things can be really slow. It can be slow to get feedback, to get approval, and to get direction. Speaking from past experience as a business consultant, this is just what happens when you scale any enterprise. The important thing is to be able to manage this effectively. This is where any previous project management skills, even if it's organising your study schedule at university or helping manage the kids' school and after work activities at home, will come in. So I found that I was struggling early on with understanding the deadlines and targets I was working to, just because I was so deep in the actual writing and all of the new learning that I was taking on and managing. More than once, I could have been more effective and helped the rest of my team by proactively understanding my own timelines. Obviously, when you're part of a big team, any delay you have will have a knock-on effect to your teammates and vice versa. So being proactive in managing these things will just not only help you, but also help the rest of your team and give you all a slightly easier life. Lesson number 8, you're not writing for yourself. So this is something that I suspect will resonate with all game writers. You will rarely be writing for yourself. Most of the time, you'll be handed an idea or some characters or an arc and asked to flesh it out. Or you'll be given the gameplay of a quest and told to make a narrative to fit it. Or maybe you'll be editing someone else's work or working on a scene in a writer's room and managing all of the feedback that brings. You're basically a mercenary with a quill pen. This also manifests by your characters often having to do or say things that you think that they wouldn't. Part of writing for games is finding a way that they could act in certain ways, and of having a flexible understanding of your characters and their motivations and values. Making sure you're involved with the other designers and understanding the gameplay elements that are being created will help you manage this element of writing. I think as writers, we're used to a certain element of control, of writing characters how we want, or dreaming up amazing scenes of excitement and adventure that may just not always translate to games, due to technical limitations, budget, time, just to name a few. It's something I was aware of before I started writing professionally, and even had a little experience of through my master's degree and through some game jams, but it still somehow came as a bit of a shock. If you want to practice this, then any group projects or game jams will help you and help expose you to this kind of collaborative, creative process. Lesson 9. Some of your work will get cut. So not only are you writing someone else's vision, but it's a vision that can be cut short at any point, no matter how hard you worked on it. This is the nature of video game development, and the sooner you can accept that, the better. Don't take it personally, as it's unlikely to be a reflection of the writing, but more often than not, the gameplay, the quest line, the bigger picture, or the budget. Another side of this is that you might work really hard on a scene and some dialogue, and then another writer, maybe one with more experience, maybe one with a deeper understanding of the culture you're representing, will come in and use your narrative as a base, but then rewrite or tweak the actual words themselves. This comes again from recognizing that game writing is a very collaborative role, and that it takes more than one person to get to a final product. Writing for a studio, especially a bigger studio where there are lots of moving parts and teams to consider, means letting go of your attachments. Do the best job you can and learn what you can, and certainly advocate for the story and the scripts when you believe that the narrative will suffer from the removal of a scene or a character or a quest. But otherwise, be gracious in letting your darlings fly into the wind when needed. If you can do this, you'll have a much happier life. And then lesson number 10 is about finding a mentor and building up your support network. So your first 6 months, writing for any studio is going to be hectic. It's going to be tough and it's going to be fun. If you are human, you're going to have days when you doubt yourself and when imposter syndrome kicks in. There will be weeks where things move so fast, you get to the end and wonder quite what happened. And there will be times when you feel behind or slower than everyone else, and this is all normal. So one thing I wish I'd have known earlier and thought of earlier is finding a trusted mentor. So finding someone who is probably a few years ahead of you in the career path, someone who's been there, done that, and got the battle scars to prove it. Obviously, when it comes to discussing kind of in-game content and narrative that you're doing as part of your job, then you need to keep these in-house and within your team. But when it comes to personal development, getting advice and feedback on interpersonal situations, how you're handling work relationships, and how you're progressing your skills, as long as you're mindful, again, of whatever NDA or contract you're under, then finding someone outside for a mentor is a really good idea. Often it's useful to get an unbiased opinion on things, and you're more likely to get this from a trusted outsider than a manager or someone in your team. Finding a mentor can, of course, be tough, but going to any meetups or networking events, conferences like this, joining a guild or a writers group, even asking friends in the industry for recommendations are all really good ways to start networking and meeting other writers. As with any networking, obviously be genuine, be respectful, and be reciprocal. Build honest relationships with people before asking for help, and be prepared to help pay the help forward when you can. And that is the end. So they were kind of the 10 lessons that throughout my first 6 months I wish that I'd known earlier and wish that I'd had some insight of earlier. Thank you all for listening. I hope it was useful. I hope parts of it were useful to some of you. You can obviously find me, I loiter on Twitter a lot. I try and say things, but maybe more in the future. Or you can check out my website, and I'll also be around at the conference for the rest of the day, so it'd be great to chat to some of you then. Thank you.